is a possibility here because both parties seem to have individual duties and responsibilities in the business, and you can foresee and you can envision this business down the line running as it is, and just thriving in these two areas, both the delivery area and the restaurant area. So that's a possibility, certainly. That doesn't eliminate, however, obviously, the calculative analysis of how much each of them will owe each other, depending on what value we assign for each of the divisions, right? The division of the regular restaurant and the takeout one. The second question is, how do you evaluate a buy-sell agreement between partners or shareholders, which includes a formula to buy out when valuing the business? Very good question. That typically is a very tumultuous area when there is a formula that seems to be etched in stone. So this is a collaborative process, and you can think out of the box and get away from that formula and throw into it your individual interest and goals and objectives. So, we try to stay away from the formula in a collaborative process, but sometimes we certainly start by that formula, but we try to then utilize our training to kind of get these folks to kind of meet somewhere in the middle. Um, okay, so that's the question.
Like Susan has a question.
Hi there, Susan Keys. Paul, relating to that, or for everybody to discuss, relating to the first question that was posed, if they're going to continue to work together, do we have to have evaluation, and how does that affect it? I happen to be working on a case where that's part of the issue, but I think if we kick the can down the road, we have to at least plan for these divorcing couples that they may not be able to work together. In a particular case that I'm working on, we still did evaluation, and one person would be employed by the business in a certain capacity, as receiving income, and there was still a buyout of the business where one person retained the business and the other person didn't. But I think avoiding evaluation when couples are divorcing and working together is really just kicking the can down the road. You're ultimately maybe going to have to get to that. What if working together no longer is a possibility? And so we're back to the valuation issue.
Right.
Do you think that it's necessary in this case for the business to be evaluated, to come up with a number for each business?
I think, in answering Susan's point and then your question, Allison, I think if the business certainly is not going to be run together anymore, then you have to put a value to the assets that possibly may be spinned off, right? So one of the options is a spin-off of the delivery business. Now, that delivery business is going to have the common name. So someone is going to feel that name has a value, whether it's enterprise or personal. But to answer the direct question, I don't see how you can get away from putting a number to the business or the segments of the business if the parties are definitely going to go their separate ways, keeping a part of that business. Now, in the collaborative process, we talk about these numbers. We obviously negotiate based on the interests. I will probably most likely in this case faced with that scenario that the parties are going to go ahead and go the separate ways, but part of the business in their separate ways, I'm going to have to give a range. I'm going to have to talk about and actually calculate and very difficult to calculate the personal goodwill aspect of this business, which clearly has a lot of characteristics that I talked about in my academic little session that I spoke to you about. Certainly we made it so not only in the fact pattern, but in the case that actually caused this, we had all these characteristics. So Susan, you got to value the business. I mean, the most easiest way is for these folks to say, look, we got a tremendous business in our hand. Let's become partners. Let's carve that out of the marital estate. You know, we're partners 50-50. Let's move forward. We're divorced. Let's just, you know, move on. We have a great thing going together and let's move on. Sure, you don't need a value. But if these folks are not going to do that, which is like what, 90 some odd % of the time, you need a number.
We did write this fact pattern that they were not at each other's throats, that they had just drifted apart and that there weren't other parties involved and that they weren't angry. They just decided that they didn't want to be married anymore. So that would make a splitting of the businesses a lot easier. But as we know, like Paul said, in most cases, that isn't the situation. Most cases, there's a lot of anger or resentment, depending on the circumstances. So dividing that business in half or still having them together emotionally is just sort of a continuation of the bad marriage issues.
So if you give a range, the parties could just agree without having to go through the formal business evaluation.
I don't think you can give a range without doing some analytics.
Some.
So that's the question I have. And again, going back to a case that I'm involved in, is it even possible for a neutral professional to deal with personal goodwill in a collaborative case? Isn't that risky territory since there's such subjectivity in that analysis? Isn't that such a difficult role for the financial professional to play when we're really looking at the personal goodwill? Of course, you could do evaluation of the business, but then getting to that next section, which is the personal goodwill part, that's what's really complicated and can blow up a collaborative case. To me.
Susan, you have a great point, and is a point that every colleague of mine, financial professional in a collaborative setting, and the team has to evaluate. I got into deep trouble by doing evaluation in a collaborative setting. And Bet, and I'm going to say the names, and Bet is one of the participants, Bet Quiet, and she can go ahead and opine. I gave my evaluation. I did the work. I thought I did a great job. I went down the list of all the academics of goodwill that I just talked about a little while ago. Clear cut to me, right? When I presented it, it created World War III.
Emotions, Paul, emotions. You left them out.
I got something to say.
And I got in trouble.
Hold on, Charles.
I was critiqued.
Charles.
I was, you know, torn apart. And Bet, I don't know if you want to mention what happened there. But Susan brings out a good point. And I would like to hear in the chat from my colleagues, you know, do we even, you know, do these carve outs and give these folks terrible news to that party that has always heard during the marriage, hey, my business is worth $1 million. Hey, I got an offer for $1 million, yet Paul Garcia comes up with a value of $350,000 based on the divorce premise and other goodwill factors and discounts.
Before we get to Bet, Charles, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, Sheila and I just finished up a case that we had a business that the parties were jointly involved in, both parties. And they had an offer to sell the business prior to divorce for like 14 million. And then we got into a collaborative process, and the goodwill, the business was 100% goodwill. Other than the hard assets were worth about 16 million. And then if you put the goodwill, it's 18 million. So, but the husband knew that, and he wasn't gonna back off. And we ended up settling the case for the valuation of being 6 million. I don't think we had any choice but to do a valuation on that business because it was just the sale prior to the collaborative process was dependent on my client staying in the business. which is all, makes it all goodwill. And it was a real difficult issue for the wife to swallow. No one was blaming the neutral accountant in the case, but it's a tough pill to swallow.
Could you,
Go ahead.
could you look at other factors in the marital estate to make it more palatable for the wife, as opposed to just having
Yeah,
to
we
receive the
talked
value of
about
the
alimony,
business?
and we came up with a number that we gave her a little bit more than 50-50, but I mean, the husband was, he was saying, hey, the business isn't worth that. You can't sell it without me staying. And it was a real difficult problem for her to swallow, but she eventually did. I mean, there was a lot of money. They had a lot of other money, so it wasn't as difficult.
So we tried to come up with creative solutions, and one of them was we were getting really caught in the weeds on a number of different topics about the exact amount something was valued. So we started looking if we bundled them together, and however you get there, you might attribute different values to each of the elements of that bundle, but could you agree on a bottom line number of the bundle? And we made some progress with that approach, but.
Beth, did you want to talk about what really happened?
You're on mute.
What really happened was the case blew up. The woman fired her attorney and would not accept Paul's valuation and was going to pull out of the process. So through assistance of Randy Heller, she found another good collaborative attorney, and the two of us suggested that maybe we get another valuation because otherwise the case was going to break down. What happened was the person that was selected started to do a valuation that was going to be unacceptable to either party. And so we went back to Paul's valuation and came up with some creative solutions as to what the wife wanted to do in terms of her future. And just, I think what everybody's saying, did a global settlement that didn't necessarily base itself on only the valuation, but added some other things. You can have an alimony component that you give a little bit more to, or other things that we were able to solve the case. That's what happened.
Susan?
Elaine put in the chat along the lines of what I was saying. Is it something we should consider that when we have a collaborative matter and evaluation, should we farm that out to somebody other than the neutral financial professional? It's something to consider as a solution for what happened in Beth's case. And secondly, and I was going to suggest as an option too, what we did in this case that I'm involved in is that we did evaluation and we talked about a range of possibilities for personal goodwill. If it was all personal goodwill, if there was some, and how the range could affect the value, but we stopped before we even got to that. We just did not even get that number. We talked about how that number could affect the outcome, and we talked about the ranges, and then we stopped right there, and we never got to that. I don't know if that's appropriate, but that's what we decided to do in our case, because otherwise they'd have competing valuations in a litigation context, and we just didn't want to get there. So, I mean, that was how we approached it in our particular case, and we felt that we were comfortable with that, with the clients understanding the risk that it was a number we didn't know. We were guessing on a range as we did our negotiation. Those are two options.
Lonnie,
To answer Elaine's question, certainly you can farm out to a consultant, a neutral consultant, to do the valuation. That kind of takes the pressure off the neutral financial professional of the case. But that sort of, I think, kind of loses a little bit of what the concept of a neutral financial professional is, and in trying to help. I mean, we can come up with a range that's objective, that is not subjective and it's not pinning down a number. We're not taking sides, and that's what I would suggest, because sometimes consultants can be expensive in the process and so forth. But I guess certainly it's an option. You can certainly have that option. There's no doubt about that. The other comment I wanted to make related to our case, you have to be careful in the consultant coming in and then throwing even more gas to that fire by bringing in two theoretical concepts and how other states view personal goodwill. And that just blew up in even more in our case. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
I think that we always have to come back and look at the clients and say, what are your goals? What does a good divorce look like to you? And as Sheila referred to, they came up with a bottom line global settlement. Not everyone gets what they want. And I think that Lana can talk about outcomes and risk and rewards and what the settlement would look like going forward, regardless of the precise number of each business.
The risk and reward, the emotional part would be after you fight like hell, what do you have left? What is the reward after the fact? But Randy made a good point in that, the couple has to really decide what they can live with and what they really want when they have to weigh, how much fighting is really worth fighting over the actual evaluation. Marta, though, had her hand up, and as a financial person, she probably has.
I think I side with Paul here on his point, because I think that first thing, most people already are anxious with a group of 4 experts in the case. And every expert in a case brings it their own differing viewpoint. And when you have people that are dueling, it doesn't help get the parties to yes. And if the objective here is to recognize someone's contributions, and you can scope out a reasonable range of what those potential contributions could be and what the boundaries are. I mean, you're dealing with issues of discount rates and very complex things, and you can explain some of the elements in those calculations. And here, I think doing it with and without goodwill is a good exercise, because then you have the situation of what that potential value could be. How much would it cost for you to go to court and fight about it? And once you start discounting all those factors off, or how much it will cost you if you want precision in this process to get to it. And it may be that you can work your way into an accommodation and a solution that is better than that. If it is the most material, it's a huge number, and the range is huge, then I do think it may be better to get an independent person to participate. But beyond it being a really significant problem that the neutral professional can't come across, I think you can work through those issues with the parties.
Excellent
I think
point,
you
Mark.
can.
Fraser had written something. I don't know. I don't see him on my screen, but he's here somewhere. Fraser, did you want to make a comment? Okay.
I was muted. Sorry.
Okay.
I've seen it work when you have strong collaborative lawyers who, with good knowledge of valuation themselves, can explain what to anticipate if there's a personal goodwill component to the situation. But I've also seen that the neutral often is tainted if he tries to do or she is tainted by the consequences of their own evaluation. it's hard to maintain neutrality and express an opinion on a very valuable asset and not be vulnerable. So
That-
almost always, I mean, if we're going to try and have the neutral do it, there's a discussion well in advance that puts into context the probabilities of what it will show. But I think it's safer usually to use an outside expert.
I definitely don't think that the neutral, given the amount of fluctuations and variables in the appraisal, should be doing ever any single point estimates in that conversation.
Amen.
Because you have to be able to educate, no, seriously, because you have to be able to educate the parties that there are elements to those valuations that can be in fact interpreted differently by different people. And if you don't put that on the table, I think the team is doing the parties a disservice.
Is that the responsibility, Marta, of us, the neutral financial professionals, when describing the valuation, or should the attorneys ahead of time give a heads up to the
Well,
parties?
I think both, because, you know, these people are drinking from hoses of information. But I do think that I think the group has to remind them of that. And I think when you present, if you decide that you're going to go the range of value route, then you need to present, here are the elements under scenario A. Here are the elements under scenario B. Why would an appraiser choose these different scenarios? I would never refer to myself as the ultimate appraiser, because I don't think you can do that. Got to be really careful.
Look, as my colleague Ed Sachs says, there's a lot of subjectivity in valuations, and we all agree that formal valuations done by neutral financial professionals often lead to trouble, to problems, and potentially the case from breaking down. So we have to, stay away from areas like that.
So if we were to come to some type of conclusion or recommendation about the best way to handle this situation, what would you say? We've had a collective kind of feedback from the group. What would be the major recommendation that you would give in a situation like that, Paul or anyone else?
I have my opinions, but I want to hear from the chat group first.
Yeah. I mean,
Randy?
Randy wants to talk. You're on mute.
Mute. Okay.
Thanks. I wanted to say something because as Beth mentioned, and I didn't even realize it initially, we were talking about a case where I was the therapist for the wife. And Beth, I hope you know, we never even talked about this, that the reason I encouraged her to of course, speak to the team first and then seek information from another collaborative attorney was because really all of her issues were about fear. So in terms of what we're talking about, I think that Lana, as the facilitator, has, she's got the most challenging piece. It's, about how to help this woman to feel safe, feel comfortable, and how to help the team to set the context for that. And then, the other issues kind of, I think, fall more into place because really all of her resistance was about being uninformed, and I'm not blaming the team for this. This was the dance they did in their marriage, being uninformed and being afraid of how she was going to move on. And when she heard pretty much the same thing from another attorney that she was hearing from the team, she felt more safe. I think fear drives so much of this that we really have to focus more on the emotions as opposed to the practical matters. That's just my outside, from another perspective opinion.
No, I totally agree with you. The driving force in most of these cases are the underlying emotions that have nothing to do with the legal or the financial aspect. So they distort everything. And
Exactly.
So addressing the underlying fears and the underlying emotional issues, attachments and resentments and anger and so forth can really help to lead to a conclusion. But that's a very, very difficult thing when you're doing an evaluation, a forensic evaluation of a business, because it seems like you're not really dealing with the emotions that are driving the entire process. And that's why we have facilitators in these cases, for that very, very reason, because I think they're able to access more the underlying things that are driving the real controversy or the issues. And so I think one of the things that I would try to take away from this is, please use the facilitator to try to get under. It doesn't matter if it's the evaluation of a business or whatever the issue happens to be, to use the underlying issues that are driving the real forces that may not be very apparent on the surface.
Well, the security issue is a big factor for the person who maybe is not the involved spouse of these businesses, and the entire marital estate going forward. As I said, what does a good divorce look like to that spouse? A lot of other factors just besides the actual number of the business, even though that becomes a total power ego scenario for both parties when they're talking about that.
Yeah, Allison, I think it goes back to the basics where we try to find out what are the real interests and goals. The real interests are, why do they really want what they want, and how do we help them get it? And if it's security, or if it's safety, or if it's something else, if we really know the underlying issue, we can get to yes. If we don't know the underlying issue, it's much more difficult.
So Lana, you said, what's the takeaway? And there's a lot of takeaways. This was a great discussion, but one of the takeaways is that to be very mindful that when there's evaluation that we're entering into what could be dangerous territory, to have the clients very prepared, whether it be by the facilitator and their lawyers, about what we're asking of the neutral financial professional, and to support the financial professional, and to try to come up with ranges, because when we put bottom lines on numbers, somebody's going to be disappointed likely. And the personal goodwill piece is so subjective that I think Marta said, I don't think you could ever really put a value on a pinpoint number, or you're really going to have a problem in a collaborative setting.
Sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to let you know this is the 5-minute mark.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments?
Just one more thing. What I'm remembering, I don't know if you mentioned it at the beginning, but this woman had this family, sorry, had 3 very young children, very young. And again, she was looking at their lives and their future, and her life and her future. So more than what the business was valued at, she wanted to know that she would be okay and that the kids would be okay. That's what I remember.
Well, in our fact pattern, we don't know if Judy wants to continue with JJ on Wheels, or if she really liked being part of JJ Catering. We don't know enough information, I think, in this fact pattern to get to a yes solution.
Correct.
Actually, I don't know whatever happened with her, but it's interesting to note to the lawyers on the team, she wanted to become a lawyer after this case. She wanted to go back.
Become a lawyer, and
Did she?
fortunately, she didn't use her legal skills to continue to make her ex-husband's life miserable, and they are functioning. But
Oh,
in
I'm
the
glad you
end,
did that. That's good.
in the end, no matter what the valuations are, if you can't fund them, if you're going to have to fund them by destroying the business or making things so impossible, it's not going to work. So there's really 2 competing pieces. There's the valuation, and there is how you're going to make each party have their piece without destroying the business, the family unit, borrowing money at too high a rate, doing all of those things. So I think that's the lawyer's job, to present different scenarios that show what can happen and derive, and sort of focusing on arriving at a reasonable settlement that each party can live with, because that you can have a valuation that's up in the sky, but if you can't fund it out, it doesn't really matter.
I guess the good news that collaborative was able to handle this, collaborative divorce was able to handle the difficult issue like this and come to a conclusion and get it settled. In litigation, I don't even want to think about how, what the outcome would have been. So we're all in this because we're collaborative. Any final words before we have to go, because we're at the very, very last minute? I want to thank everybody for attending. I want to thank Lizette and Kelly for putting this grand idea of grand rounds. What a great idea.
I love
to
it.
do this on a monthly basis and to bring different issues that come up. And also for the privilege of our group, CFLI, to be first. And we really appreciate that so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Lana.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was
Thank
great.
you all. Thank you all. Thank you, Elaine.
So
Thank you.
everyone's sending everybody off to to their individual groups, practice groups. And if you'd like to stay, you're welcome to. And if not, you're free to go.
Okay, take care. Have a great weekend, everyone.
But
Stay
if
safe,
you
everybody.
want to stay, you have to put it in the chat that you want to stay and what your practice group is.
Do we have anybody?
Maybe not. Next time.
Next time.
And
We'll do
thank
that
you.
next time. Thanks, Elaine, and thanks, Brittany, for your hard work, and Lizette.
Thank you all.
And
Happy.
Brittany, I
Thank
didn't
you
know it was
all.
your idea. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
This is great, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank
Really
you.
Hi, Elaine.
fabulous start.
Thank you,
So
Elaine.
grateful. Well done. You made it look
Really great.
easy.
I
Thank
know,
you.
you really did. Thanks for the great kickoff, guys.
Thank you.
CFLI kicked some butt.
We'll wait for the feedback before we.
And now I'm going to take you over
Feedback.
lunch.
I want feedback.
And you look in the chat. There was excellent feedback in the chat. If Brittany, you know how to scroll up and down?
Mhm.
There's really lovely
And
comments.
I'll be happy to circulate the chat to the presenters and the outreach committee.
Got it. Okay, team,
Thank you.
you're wonderful.
Thank you,
Bye.
Paul.
See you
and
later.
Allison.
See you later.
Thank you, guys. And listen, we want feedback too. Let us know how we can make it, improve it for the upcoming ones. This was the first one.
Yeah.
It was fabulous. I think I was on like a few minutes later, so I don't know if you did that idea of staying on with your practice group early enough for people, like early, too early, too late, I know, but that's okay.
Well, I think an hour is
Do it the next
great.
time. We
I
can do
think
it the
an
next
hour
time.
is perfect. I don't even know. I mean, you can make that available, but I will be very surprised if you have people staying on.
Right.
Because I mean, look at our board meetings, an hour.
Right. No, I
An hour is
totally-
enough. You know, everybody wants lunch.
Right. I just had thought that maybe, because especially now in the COVID world,